After the X.Men Freedom Island incident, Roy traveled to the Marvel Universe and obtained the fish fruit, phantom species, and green dragon form at the beginning. Iceman. I can create low temperatures and freeze everything. Roy. I can do it too. Fireman. I can control flames and burn everything. Roy. I can do it too. Storm Woman. I can summon lightning and control hurricanes. Roy. I can do it too. Dr. Banner. I can transform into a Hulk. Roy. I can become a green dragon. This is the story of a demon fruit power practitioner who can do whatever he wants in the Marvel world. Keywords of the novel. The Phantom Beast Qinglong in Meimang without a pop-up window, the complete collection download of the Phantom Beast Qinglong TXT in Meimang, and the latest chapter reading of the Phantom Beast Qinglong in Meimang. Chapter 1. Marvel Universe. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Marvel Universe Marvel 100086 Universe. Westchester County. Xavier Genius Youth School. Classroom. Roy, sitting by the window, looked at the scenery outside and sighed helplessly. It shouldn't be. How did I travel to the Marvel Universe? I should go to the world of One Piece. That's right. Roy is not a native of Marvel Universe, but a traveler. More precisely, it is a traveler whose soul pierced through a young Chinese mutant. Coincidentally, the original owner of his current body is also called Roy. Upon hearing his sigh, Poppy, the Iceman, sitting next to him, immediately turned his head and whispered, "Roy, what's wrong? Are you feeling unwell?" "No, I just feel a bit bored." Roy immediately replied. "Focus on the class, it will be over 10 minutes before class ends." Iceman, Bobby continued. Then, he turned his gaze back to his current girlfriend, the mischievous little rascal named Luocha Girl. Although Roy only traveled to this universe this morning, he has already figured out what kind of universe he has traveled to. Firstly, there are mutants in this universe, so it is not a pure Marvel movie universe. Secondly, there are also the magical four heroes in this universe, so it is not purely an X.Men movie universe. Finally, based on the current situation, what happens in the X.Men movie universe should also happen in this universe. Because the Freedom Island incident that led to the detention of Magneto King occurred just over a month ago. This is evident from being mischievous since childhood and now being in school, as well as becoming a couple with the Iceman. There are both the same and completely different places here as he remembers. For example, he met Lorna Dane, the daughter of Magneto, and Clarice Ferguson, the adopted daughter of the saber-toothed tiger, at school. Even if you cross the wrong world, you can still cross into a Marvel universe that is different from what you remember. At the thought of this, Roy didn't know whether he was lucky or unlucky. After calming his mood, he opened the system page that only he could see. Host. Roy Race. Human, mutant, devil fruit ability, devil fruit. Fish and fish fruit, phantom beast species, green dragon form, mutating, dominance. None strength. 13.3, fist power 1.54 tons, speed. 7.2 physical fitness. 12.9 spirit. 5.2 bounty. 50 berry X gene superpower. Fiery task. None storage space. Opened system wall. Not opened, under maintenance, opening time unknown. Taking a glance at his current physical attributes, Roy found that compared to this morning, his physical attributes have improved a bit. According to the system's explanation, a normal adult male's four-dimensional body attributes will be around 1. If we only look at his physical attributes, he is now considered a decent mutant. But he couldn't be happy at all. Perhaps due to traveling through the wrong world, the demonic fruit he obtained was somewhat different from what he remembered. As a mythical beast species in the animal kingdom, under normal circumstances, at the moment of obtaining the fish fruit, mythical beast species, and green dragon form, he can possess powerful power similar to that of a green dragon. Although he cannot immediately acquire the strength of Kaido, his physical attributes will definitely not be limited to those at present. This is fish fruit, phantom species, and green dragon form, not an ordinary animal-type demon fruit. In addition, the 3 words, mutating, after the devil fruit are enough to indicate that there is something wrong with his devil fruit now. From his current physical attributes constantly improving, he speculates that the power of the fish, fruit, beast, and green dragon form should gradually be exerted until the 3 words, in mutation, completely disappear. Otherwise, he wouldn't have thought of any reason to continuously improve his physical attributes without doing anything. Although it is not possible to immediately obtain the powerful power of a green dragon, overall, this is not a bad thing. Gradually increasing his strength can help him better adapt to the acquired strength. There will be no awkward situation where there is a powerful force in the air, but it cannot be perfectly controlled. In addition, he has experienced a surge in power but cannot control it well. Blazing hot. Not long after crossing into this world this morning, he used his own superpower, Blaze. Hot. X-Gene superpower, after use, can significantly improve one's strength, speed, and physique in a short period of time. This is the system's explanation for the scorching power of superpowers. When using the superpower, Blaze, he opened the attribute panel and took a look. He found that in the Blaze state, his 4 body attributes skyrocketed by about 3 to 5 times each. The surge in physical attributes is indeed a very satisfying feeling. But the superpower of blazing heat also has its drawbacks. That is, after using this superpower, he will weaken for a period of time. Based on the last and only usage experience, using hot once will weaken him for about an hour. That's a feeling of being completely hollowed out. Although he only experienced it once, Roy was very certain that he didn't like that feeling at all. However, when it comes to using the superpower, Blaze, he will still use it without hesitation. After all, compared to the feeling of weakness when the body is completely emptied, death is clearly much more serious. After browsing through his current body attributes, Roy closed the attribute panel that only he could see. More than 10 minutes later, the biology class taught by Storm Girl Aurora finally came to an end. As soon as Storm Girl left the classroom, a girl of 17 or 18 years old, with magenta long hair, light green eyes, delicate and fair appearance, and typical Chinese characteristics, came to Roy. This girl is none other than the adopted daughter of the saber-toothed tiger, Shining, Clarice Ferguson. In comics and movies, Flickering has a completely different image. The Flicker in the manga, with purple skin and pink hair. In live-action TV dramas and movies, although Twinkle has long magenta hair and light green eyes, her skin color is normal, just giving people a feeling of dyed hair and beautiful pupils. From an appearance perspective, the Flicker in front of Roy is more like a youthful version of the movie's Reversal of the Future. Leading the aesthetic of an era with one's own strength, and ruthlessly cutting off the cheeks of women from both sides of the Taiwan Strait and 3 regions. The Flicker in front of Roy was almost the same as the woman when she was young. What's wrong? Seeing Clarice approaching him, Roy took the initiative to ask. That. Thank you yesterday. Clarice timidly said. Yesterday. What happened yesterday? Roy, who only crossed over this morning, looked at Clarice with a puzzled expression on his face. Although his soul pierced through this body, he did not fully inherit the memory of the original owner of the body. Have you forgotten what happened yesterday? After seeing the puzzled expression on Roy's face, Clarice quickly said. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Clarice's Invitation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Clarice's Invitation. This is not forgetting, but I have no idea what happened yesterday. I just arrived in this world this morning. Although he had no idea what exactly happened yesterday, Roy remained calm on the surface and slowly said. It's okay, don't worry about it. He really doesn't know what happened yesterday, but judging from Clarice's thanks just now. If nothing unexpected happens, he should have helped Clarice yesterday. As for what exactly it helped, it doesn't matter. My adoptive father told me that if I accept someone else's help, I must find an opportunity to repay them. If you don't mind, I'll treat you to dinner tonight. Clarice said shyly. Please treat me to dinner. There's no need for that. Although Roy did not inherit all the memories of the original owner of his body, he knew that at the Genius Youth School in Xavier, also known as the Mutant School, eating was not for his own expense. Normal food and clothing expenses are covered by the school. Of course, if it goes beyond the personal needs of normal life and learning, such as buying the latest Audi R8 sports car, then you will need to pay for it yourself. After seeing Roy's intention to continue refusing, Clarice immediately said. It's not eating inside the school, it's going to the small town outside. Normally, Roy, who has just crossed this world today, should try to avoid too much private contact with others at this time. But upon hearing Clarice's words, he nodded decisively and agreed. Firstly, Clarice is a beautiful woman. Although she hasn't fully developed yet, there are signs of her becoming a beautiful woman. Going out to dinner with a beautiful woman doesn't seem like a bad thing. Secondly, Clarice doesn't look particularly smart. Roy doesn't look down on Clarice's intelligence and thinks she's a bit foolish, but Clarice doesn't seem like someone with a lot of social experience no matter what. This means that it won't be very difficult for him to eavesdrop on Clarice and inquire about some things. For example, to figure out what kind of person the original owner of the body was before. Finally, the food in the school restaurant is really not very good. It's not that the food provided by the school cafeteria is bad or unhygienic, but it really doesn't count as delicious food. Having a full stomach is definitely not a problem, but don't think too much about everything else. Okay. Roy nodded and accepted Clarice's invitation. Upon hearing his answer, Clarice's face immediately showed a happy expression, as if she had accomplished something particularly important. After attending another cultural class led by Laser Eye Scott, we arrived at today's final class. Super Ability Practice Class. It is said to be a practice class, but in fact, it is taking students to the lawn behind the main building, allowing them to freely practice their superpowers. During this process, Laser Eye and Storm Girl will provide some suggestions. Although the X.Men have already been established, Professor X has no intention of cultivating reserve personnel for the X.Men. In practice classes, Laser Eye and Storm Girl will teach some combat tips. But teaching students these skills is more about giving them the ability to protect themselves from harm, rather than cultivating them into warriors. On the vast lawn, students practice their superpowers in groups of 3 or 5. Roy looked around. Then, he came to a big tree where several people were hugging each other and sat down with a relaxed expression on his face. Whether it's the ability of Devil Fruit or the super ability, Blazing, they are not very suitable for practicing in public. The superpower is so hot that I won't say anything about it. As long as he uses it, he needs to experience a feeling of his body being emptied. As for the abilities of Fish Fruit, Phantom Beast, and Green Dragon form, they cannot be practiced in public. Human form, which means it's okay when in normal form, looks just like a normal person without any special features. And once transformed into a beast or animal-like form, as long as the eyes are not blind, you can immediately notice something is wrong. Although transformational superpowers are not particularly rare among mutants. But for Roy, who has only shown his body-strengthening superpowers, transforming into half-beast and beast forms will only bring trouble. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, he would not transform into a beast or human beast in front of others without sufficient self-protection power. Unless there is a situation where one has to transform. Like Roy, there are not a few students who choose to sit down and rest anywhere. Unlike other courses, there are no requirements for superpower practice classes. No matter whether they practice or not, Laser Eye and Storm Girl will not say anything. Roy plans to do nothing and sit directly under the tree until class ends. But some people don't want him to spend this practice class so easily. Not long after he sat down, several teenagers aged 17 or 18 walked over. "Planter kid, you won't forget yesterday's agreement, will you?" Roy's current body is indeed only 17 years old. But his soul is not only 17 years old. Being called a kid by a seemingly underage kid gives him a feeling of being scolded by a child in an adult tone. However, what he cares about now is not that the young man named Morgan in front of him calls himself a kid, but what he said about yesterday's agreement. Yesterday again. Roy is becoming increasingly curious about what the original owner of his body did yesterday. Seeing him neither answering nor getting up, Morgan continued. "Don't think it's okay if you don't speak. Didn't you arrogantly say last night that there was something we could solve together this afternoon? Don't say that I bullied you on the basis of having too many people. I am the only one who fought with you today. As long as you can beat me, we will apologize to Clarice immediately, and we will never go looking for Clarice again in the future." Morgan looked at Roy disdainfully and quickly said. Although it's still unclear what exactly happened yesterday, Roy can probably guess something. If nothing unexpected happens, it should be Morgan and his gang harassing Clarice and then being stopped by the original owner of the body. Both sides did not fight at the time, and agreed to resolve their grievances during this afternoon's practice class. "If you want to fight, you can." As soon as the words fell, Roy stood up. He originally planned to quietly test his current abilities when no one was around. But since someone came knocking on his door, he wouldn't miss such an opportunity. Although fighting and brawling are strictly prohibited in mutant schools, sparring during practice classes is an exception. After hearing Roy's answer, Morgan continued to disdainfully say. "A waste superpower that can only last for 3 minutes. I really don't know how Clarice would take a liking to a useless person like you. 3 minutes. Morgan is right, Roy's superpowers are blazing and can only last for 3 minutes now. But one thing Morgan guessed wrong was that he didn't intend to use his superpower, Blaze, in the upcoming confrontation. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Playing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Playing from the outside. Roy today is no different from yesterday. But the fact is, today he is completely different from yesterday. If the soul has changed, it won't be said. There has been a significant improvement in physical attributes alone. Roy remembers very clearly that when he first opened the attribute panel this morning, the highest physical strength was only after 4 o'clock. Now, his power attribute has increased to 13.3. The other 3 attributes, speed, physical fitness, and mental state, have also been improved by about 3 times. From a different perspective, his current physical attributes are already similar to the data obtained from the original owner's use of the superpower, Blaze. No one, including Morgan, Storm Woman, and Laser Eye, would have thought that his physical attributes had such a significant improvement. Roy ignored Morgan's mockery and took off his coat, throwing it aside. After seeing his movements, Morgan obediently took off his coat and gave a glance to the attendant next to him, asking them to stand aside and watch the play. Although Roy and Morgan had not yet met, their confrontation immediately caught the attention of others. Soon, the students around who were practicing their superpowers freely gathered around. After seeing the students gathered together, Storm Girl and Laser Eye quickly rushed over. Although we can learn from each other during practice classes, not all students can freely learn from each other. Like Poppy the Iceman and John the Fireman, they can't. In fact, only students whose superpowers are physical reinforcement types can compete with each other in practice classes. If the superpower is to manipulate or release energy, even if the students want to compete, teachers such as Storm Woman and Laser Eye will stop them. After seeing that the people to compete next were Roy and Morgan, Stormwind and Laser Eye didn't say anything and tacitly agreed to their duel. However, they did not leave immediately. The sparring between Roy and Morgan is unlikely to pose a fatal danger. But to avoid accidents, as teachers, Storm Girl and Laser Eye still need to stay behind just in case. Roy didn't immediately take action, as he looked at Morgan with a disdainful expression on his face while recalling information related to Morgan in his mind. In the few remaining memories of the original owner, he recalled Morgan's superpowers. Far beyond the strength and physique of ordinary people. Morgan's superpowers may not be particularly strong, but they are not weak either. Physical reinforcement type superpowers are not uncommon among mutants, and can even be said to be very common. After recalling Morgan's superpowers, Roy also recalled some things that were not particularly important. For example, why does Morgan look down on him so much? There are two reasons. The first one is because he is of Chinese descent. The second one is due to his superpowers. Not to mention Chinese Americans, Morgan, who grew up in a beautiful country since childhood and is also a mutant, has a tendency towards white and mutant supremacy. There are only 2 Chinese Americans in the mutant school now. One is Roy, and the other is Clarice. Clarice is a woman, and she is also a beautiful woman. Although Morgan looks down on people of other skin colors, the exception is the handsome opposite sex. Besides his skin color, Roy's superpower, Fiery, also made him very unhappy. Because after unleashing his superpowers, Roy will quickly possess the same strength and physique as him. In Morgan's view, Roy, who is of Chinese descent, is simply not worthy of such power. Even if it's just a short-term possession. After seeing Roy standing in place with a calm expression, Morgan didn't hesitate and rushed towards Roy like a cheetah hunting prey. Unlike Roy's superpower, Blaze, Morgan's superpower does not require special activation or use. As long as he is alive, his superpowers will remain in effect. In just the blink of an eye, Morgan arrived in front of Roy and punched him directly in the head with his right fist. Morgan's attack was simple, just a simple straight punch. With far greater strength and speed than ordinary people, simple straight punches also possess impressive power. However, before his fist hit Roy, Roy hit him ahead of time. Bang! Under the gaze of Storm Woman and Iceman, Morgan, who was rushing towards him, was kicked away by Roy and flew backwards several meters. After kicking Morgan away, Roy shook his head in disappointment. Is that all? He thought Morgan would have decent combat skills, but it turned out that he had overthought it. Although Morgan's straight punch just now looked quite standard, it had the style of a professional boxer. But it's just that it looks good. Morgan never expected that he, who was the first to launch an attack, would be kicked away by Roy. Although Roy's kick did not cause him serious injury, what he truly couldn't bear was being kicked away by Roy under the gaze of so many people. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! After standing firm, Morgan looked at Roy with a face full of anger. Then, like a wild beast, it ran towards Roy. After seeing Morgan's angry expression now, Roy's evaluation of him became even lower. Can't we accept this? This mental endurance is also too poor. Roy is hiding from Roast's attack while complaining about Morgan in his heart. Although Morgan tried his best to attack Roy, no matter how he swung his fists, he could not hit Roy in front of him. Compared to Morgan, who was full of anger, Roy at this moment was not as calm as usual. Although Roy is not a master of fighting, his experience is undoubtedly more extensive than Morgan, who was overwhelmed by anger. Before crossing over, Roy had a strong interest in combat and signed up to learn it for a period of time. He has learned Sanda, boxing, Muay Thai, and Taekwondo quite well. He just kicked Morgan away, which is the forward kick in Sanda leg technique. And what he is now using to dodge Morgan's attacks is the pendulum swing and retreat dodge in boxing. Although these are some common techniques, they are already sufficient to deal with Morgan. Although the students around couldn't see anything, their laser eyes immediately recognized it. Has Roy ever practiced boxing specifically before? The laser eye recognized Roy's current dodge technique and footwork and asked Stormwind. There shouldn't be any record of this in the materials he submitted. Storm Girl shook her head. If I'm not mistaken, he should have practiced for a considerable period of time. Morgan is going to lose, their skills differ too much. The laser eye continued. That's not necessarily true. Roy's superpower, Blaze, can only last for 3 minutes, and as time goes by, his strength and speed will significantly decrease. Morgan just needs to endure these 3 minutes. Compared to Roy, Stormwind is still more optimistic about Morgan. Morgan can't hold on for 3 minutes. Don't tell me, you can't tell that Roy is currently teasing Morgan. Except for the initial kick, Roy never counterattacked. He knew better than anyone that his superpowers couldn't last too long, but he still chose to dodge instead of counterattack. It's not difficult to guess what this means. This little guy is a bit interesting. Laser smiled and said. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Storm Woman's Questioning. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Storm Woman's Questioning. No matter why Roy and Morgan got into a fight, the laser eye didn't pay much attention. Two young guys who are not yet adults and still possess superpowers, it's not strange for them to fight for any reason. Although fighting is strictly prohibited in mutant schools, the laser eye is very clear, which can only allow students to resolve disputes in a relatively peaceful way. To completely eliminate this situation, Professor X must use his superpowers to brainwash all students. Professor X can indeed brainwash all the students in the school into loving families. But it is obvious that Professor X would never do this. Under the gaze of everyone, Morgan continued his frantic attack like a rampage. However, no matter how he swung his fists, he could never hit Roy. As time passed, the students around also noticed something was wrong. Although Roy did not counterattack, just by looking at the calm and relaxed expression on his face, you can tell that he was not incapable of counterattacking, but deliberately teasing Morgan. The students who were watching did not have the same eyesight as laser eyes, and they couldn't immediately see that Roy was deliberately teasing Morgan. But they are not any idiots either. If they haven't seen it for so long and can't even tell that Roy was intentional, then they might be a bit too foolish. Soon. 3 minutes passed. Just when everyone thought that Roy was about to lose the powerful, fiery, enhancement and could no longer easily dodge Morgan's attacks, Roy took action. Kick horizontally. I saw Roy's right leg suddenly lift up, and his calf carrying astonishing strength kicked out horizontally towards Morgan's head. Bang! In just an instant, Roy kicked Morgan in the head with his calf. Morgan never expected Roy to launch a counterattack at this time. However, even if he thought of it, he couldn't avoid it. Although Roy's horizontal kick is the most important combat leg technique in Taekwondo, with far greater strength and physical fitness than ordinary people, his kick is full of power. Although Morgan also has a physique far beyond that of an ordinary person. But after being kicked in Roy's calf, he felt as if he had been hit hard on the head by someone holding a metal baseball bat. The tremendous kicking force not only caused him intense pain, but also caused him to lose balance and fall uncontrollably to the ground. Once again. After experiencing the initial kick, Morgan was once again kicked to the ground by Roy. Not only that, he felt a dizziness like being drunk. When Roy first kicked him, he only hit his chest. Although there may also be strong pain, being kicked in the chest is completely different from being kicked in the head. After a standard horizontal kick kicked Morgan to the ground, Roy did not immediately pursue him, but gave him time to stand up. Although hitting a water dog in pain is a very enjoyable thing. But Roy knew that Laser Eye and Storm Girl would never watch him do this. If Morgan falls and continues to beat him, the two of them will definitely take action to stop him as soon as possible. So, he wants to give Morgan a chance to stand up and stand firm. Because as long as Morgan doesn't fall and give up, he can continue to attack Morgan. Morgan wouldn't have thought that Roy had already planned everything. At the moment when he stood up firmly and raised his fists again, Roy bullied him and approached him proactively. Jagger, swing, backhand straight ping go fist, Shango fist, 1-2 combo. Roy didn't hesitate at all, treating Morgan like a humanoid sandbag and continuously punching him with his fists. Bang, 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 bang. The dull drumming sound kept ringing, like a piece of music, reaching the ears of all the students around. Because Morgan has a far superior physique, Roy doesn't need to worry about accidentally killing Morgan. When attacked by Roy, Morgan had thought about dodging or counterattacking. But unfortunately, his experience and skills simply do not support him in doing so. The idea is beautiful, but the reality is cruel. The only thing Morgan can do now is to raise his hands as much as possible to protect his head and prevent himself from being beaten black and blue by Roy. Until now, as long as you're not blind, you can tell that Roy has absolutely the upper hand. Morgan now, not to mention resistance, even resistance seems somewhat inadequate. If Morgan was beaten one-sided, it would have exceeded the expectations of the surrounding students. So now, what they really can't understand is Roy's current state. Roy's superpowers can only last for 3 minutes and are not a secret in school. Up until now, 3 minutes have already passed. However, Roy's strength has not only not declined, but there are also signs of increasing strength. After greeting Morgan with the commonly used boxing moves for nearly 2 minutes, Roy finally had the idea of ending the sparring. Under the gaze of everyone, he had already taken an absolute advantage and retreated half a step. He first pulled his right fist, which served as a backhand, back a distance. Then, all forces were mobilized to attack Morgan's chest with his right fist. Heavy fists. Bang. Morgan, who only focused on protecting his head, didn't react at all. Roy's right fist hit him in the chest like a shell coming out of the barrel. Morgan first felt the excruciating pain in his heart. Then, the whole person flew out uncontrollably. After flying backwards for several meters, he fell heavily onto the grass and completely fell into a coma. When Roy pulled his right fist back, the laser eye had a bad premonition. However, before he could speak up to stop it, Roy struck a powerful punch, putting an end to this confrontation. Laser Eye and Stormwind quickly approached Morgan and checked his condition. It's not a big deal, it's just a broken rib. After examining Morgan's injury, the Laser Eye quickly said. Stormwind nodded and said to Morgan's few followers. Take Morgan to the medical room immediately. After speaking, she came to Roy and looked at him with an unhappy expression. You hit too hard. Too heavy a move. I don't quite understand what you mean, Teacher Aurora. Roy asked in reverse. You are classmates, just practicing in class and breaking your classmates' ribs, isn't that too much? The expression of Storm Girl, who was already unhappy, became even more serious. What Teacher Aurora means is, if I'm injured by Morgan, it's okay, but if I'm injured by Morgan, it's not okay. Is that what she means? Roy originally planned to give face to Stormwind. After all, she was his own teacher and it didn't matter if she said a few words. But now, upon hearing Storm's tone, he looked disdainfully and asked her back. You're being insincere, it's your fault to hurt a classmate. Storm Girl didn't expect Roy to dare to publicly refute herself in front of this multi-student. More importantly, he doesn't feel like he made a mistake at all. Cheating. Just say so, who made you a teacher? Roy said with a mocking expression on his face. You. After seeing Roy's undisguised mocking expression, Storm Woman's eyes lit up with a strange white light, as if there were clouds spinning in her eyes. At the same time, the originally clear sky was quickly shrouded in dark clouds, looking like a storm was about to strike. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Absolute Mind Protection. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Absolute Mind Protection. Storm Girl is indeed a teacher, but that doesn't mean she doesn't have any temper. Similarly, although Roy is a student, it does not mean that he has no temper when facing the teacher. If Storm didn't scold her in a scolding tone right from the beginning, he wouldn't mock Storm in front of everyone. Stormwind didn't understand the ins and outs of the situation, just because she saw him break Morgan's ribs, she assumed he had done something wrong. Since Storm Woman has made subjective judgments, of course Roy will not get used to her. Under normal circumstances, it is not advisable to break a classmate's ribs during practice classes. But this is only under normal circumstances. Although Roy doesn't know exactly what happened yesterday, he is certain that Morgan's discrimination against the original owner of his body is no longer a matter of days. Even without this discrimination, just looking at the attack Morgan just launched, you can tell that he didn't hesitate at all. If the person who is fighting Morgan today is not him, but the original owner of the body, then the one lying on the ground now is definitely the original owner of the body. Furthermore, the original owner of a knocked-down body is definitely not as simple as having a broken rib. It is not a secret that the original owner's superpower can only last for 3 minutes. Not to mention Storm Woman, even the Iceman and Clarice are equally clear. However, in the previous confrontation, Storm Woman did not immediately stop them after 3 minutes. Although the laser eye did not stop it, it was stronger than Storm in one aspect, which was that he did not decisively believe that Roy was wrong because Morgan was injured. In fact, what really annoyed Roy was what Stormwind said afterwards. Morgan's rib was broken, so it was him who was wrong. The idea of Storm Girl reminded him of those derelict, useless, and unworthy teachers he had encountered before his travels. Why does he bully you instead of bullying other classmates? Flies don't bite seamless eggs. A single slap won't make a sound. Why don't you go find the teacher? If you fight with him, it's just that you're wrong. If you're wrong, you can still argue. Teaching is indeed a profession that deserves respect, but not all teachers deserve respect. Storm Girl just assumed without saying a word that he did something wrong, making Roy recall the disgusting experiences he had experienced before. Why doesn't he bully other classmates? I don't know what these bullying classmates think about their garbage. Can't a single slap make a sound? I'll slap you in the face and see if it makes a sound. Why don't you go find the teacher? It's not because you've always been estranged that bullying in school continues to be rampant. Roy used to be a very reasonable and rule-abiding person. But the fact has proven that whether it's reasoning or following the rules, only those who are also reasoning and following the rules can be useful. For those who are unreasonable and bully others, they should fight back on the spot and use their fists to defend their rightful rights. Even if you can't win, you still need the courage to punch. Even if you lose, you must have the determination to rise up and resist. Otherwise, they will only be bullied time and time again, until they are forever trampled on, completely losing their dignity in future. Roy certainly knows that using violence to control violence is not right. But it cannot be denied that violence is sometimes the last resort to protect one's own safety and interests. Using violence in this situation is not shameful. After seeing that Storm was so angry with Roy that she used her superpowers in front of the students, Laser Eye quickly came to her and shook its head at her. Although Storm Girl is very angry now, she knows that she can only manipulate the weather to scare Roy at most. As a teacher, she absolutely cannot teach Roy a lesson in front of the students. If she did this, the consequences would not be as severe as usual. This is a big deal that will affect the reputation of mutant schools. As soon as Laser Eye finished speaking, Storm Girl began to use her superpowers to dispel the pitch-black clouds above the school. Subsequently, she and the Laser Eye received Professor X's teleportation. Take Roy to the office. Although Roy did not hear Professor X's voice, he heard the mechanical prompt sound of the system. Detected an unknown psychic force invading the host's soul, activate absolute psychic protection. Absolute mental protection. What is this thing? Roy didn't waste his brain cells guessing, silently questioning the system in his heart. Quickly, the system provided an extremely official formulaic response. To prevent the existence of the system and the identity of the host's interlocutor from being known to unrelated individuals, absolute psychological protection is given to the host, making it immune to any form of psychological influence. After seeing the response from the system, Roy showed an unexpected surprise expression. Knowing that he had traveled to the Marvel Universe and was still in the mutant school, he was pondering a question. That's how to avoid Professor X checking his own memories and thoughts. Although Professor X is not a voyeur, he will not scrutinize his memories and thoughts without reason. But this is always a hidden danger. Unlike other forms of power, it is undoubtedly much more difficult to resist the invasion of spiritual power. Invisible and intangible spiritual power is already very tricky. And Professor X's telepathy is far stronger than other telepathists. The appearance of absolute mental protection breathed a sigh of relief for Roy. Professor X in the principal's office furrowed his brow slightly. He had originally sent a teleportation directly to Roy and the other three at the same time. However, only Stormwind and Laser Eye received spiritual transmission. At the beginning, Roy was still within his telepathic range and he could perceive Roy very clearly. But in the next second, Roy disappeared from his perception. This made him involuntarily think of Magneto's helmet. After putting on his helmet, Magneto can also block his telepathy. However, unlike the shielding after Magneto put on his helmet, what he had just felt was an indescribable and powerful force that forcibly interrupted his induction. Not only that, after the induction was interrupted, he could no longer use telepathy to lock Roy's position. In his perception, Roy seemed to disappear completely. After confirming that he could no longer perceive Roy, Professor X's mind immediately flashed with a guess. Is there also some unknown powerful force hidden within Roy's body? When such thoughts came to mind, Professor X's expression immediately became extremely serious. A few minutes later, Laser Eye and Storm brought Roy to Professor X's office. Scott, Ororo, you guys go out first. I have something to talk to Roy privately about. Professor X said to the two Storm girls. Okay, Professor. Although it was a bit strange, Laser Eye and Stormwind didn't think much, turned around and left the office, and closed the door to the room. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Second Awakening. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Second Awakening. When there were only himself and Roy left in the office, Professor X looked at Roy with a kind expression and slowly said. Are you still used to living in school this year? Not bad. Roy replied. Although I only traveled to this world today, the original owner of my body has been living in school for a year. Just get used to it. If there's anything you're not used to, feel free to let me know at any time. Professor X continued. On the surface, Professor X is only asking if he is used to living in school, but Roy knows that this is definitely not Professor X's true purpose. Leaving aside the system reminder he just received, I know that Professor X was trying to telepathize with him just now. Just by looking at Professor X asking Storm and the other two to leave the office, you can tell that his purpose is definitely not that. If Professor X just wants to know if he's used to living in school, there's no need to let Storm and the other two leave. Okay. Although I guessed that Professor X had another purpose, he didn't take the initiative to mention it, and Roy pretended not to know anything and answered calmly. After seeing that Roy was calmer than he had imagined, Professor X suddenly felt that he was a bit different from before. Although Roy was not particularly introverted and shy in the past, he couldn't be as calm and composed as he is now when facing him, Storm Girl, and others. More importantly, Roy just injured Morgan. In this situation, when called to the principal's office, his emotions should be more excited. After observing Roy for a few seconds, Professor X decided to get straight to the topic and asked again. Did your X gene awaken again and give birth to new abilities? Second Awakening. Upon hearing Professor X's inquiry, Roy was momentarily stunned. Subsequently, it quickly reacted. Under normal circumstances, the first superpower awakened by mutants is their entire superpower. But besides that, there are also some abnormal situations. Second Awakening is one of them. Simply put, second awakening refers to the awakening of a new superpower after possessing it. More importantly, the superpowers obtained from the second awakening may not necessarily be related to the superpowers obtained from the first awakening. Unlike having the X gene that allows for first awakening, the probability of a second awakening is very low. Roy was still thinking about how to explain the ability of the fish, fruit, beast, and green dragon form. Now, upon hearing Professor X's inquiry, he unexpectedly discovered that a second awakening is a good excuse. Roy didn't say much and nodded. Is it really a second awakening? Although this was brought up voluntarily, Professor X did not expect that Roy had truly awakened again. Is this why his superpower, blazing, broke through the 3-minute limit? Professor X looked at Roy and couldn't help but guess. Could you please let me know what superpower you gained from your second awakening? Professor X asked politely. Although he is the principal of the mutant school, he is not the kind of superior and domineering principal. Not only that, he is also a principal who respects student privacy very much. Otherwise, with his abilities, there is nothing in the school that can be concealed from him. It's a transformation-type superpower. Roy said calmly. Is it a transformation type? I see. Although Roy did not specify what kind of transformational superpower it was sufficient for Professor X. Although the superpowers of transformation and physical reinforcement are not exactly the same, there are many similarities between the two. Far away, let's talk about it with Peter the Steel Force. The superpowers of Ganglishi are between transformation and body strengthening. He is not like Morgan, whose body is constantly at its peak after strengthening. His transformation is also different from other transformation-type superpowers, and will not change his original appearance and body shape. Although a steel warrior without transformation has extraordinary power beyond ordinary people, only after transformation can he fully unleash the power of his superpowers. Whether it's a second awakening or a transformation-type superpower, it's all an excuse that Roy found for the fish, fruit, beast, and dragon form. But upon hearing his own confession, Professor X filled his previous doubts on his own. Because he awakened a new transformational superpower for the second time, his original superpower was hot and broke through the 3-minute limit. Similarly, because he possesses new superpowers, telepathy cannot lock him in. Although this may not seem very scientific, in the face of mutant superpowers, unscientific is the norm. If the superpowers of mutants conform to science, then it is the greatest unscientific. There are not many mutants who can undergo secondary awakening. If you have any doubts about the new ability of secondary awakening, you can go to the library to find books about the secondary mutation of the X gene. Also, let's call it a day for the dispute between you and Morgan. You've also finished venting your anger. After being defeated by you in public, Morgan shouldn't be looking for your trouble again in the future. Professor X looked at Roy and said with a kind expression on his face. Roy answered calmly. By the way, if you're interested in melee combat, you can talk to Logan when he comes back. Professor X smiled and said. Okay. Roy didn't refuse and quickly replied. Among today's X.men, Wolverine Logan is undoubtedly the most skilled in close combat. To be precise, he is the only melee hero among the current X.men. Storm Girl, Laser Eye, and Phoenix Girl are all skilled in medium to long-range energy attacks. Alright, there's nothing else to do. You go out first. Okay, Professor. After speaking, Roy got up and left the office. As soon as he opened the office door, he saw Storm Woman and Laser Eye standing outside the door without leaving. After taking a glance at him, the two of them walked into the office and closed the door again. Dormitory. According to the memory in his mind, Roy returned to the dormitory where he lived. Although this is a school, it is somewhat different from the true school. Whether it's classrooms and dormitories, or libraries and restaurants, they are all renovated later. This was originally Professor X's family estate, so even if it is renovated, there will still be some imperfections. For example, the number of rooms in the main building of the estate cannot achieve 1 room per student. Except for the teacher, students usually have 2 or 3 people in 1 room. After returning to the dormitory, Roy saw his roommate. Ganglishi. The person who lives in the same room as him is none other than the young and muscular Iron Man. "I'm back, did the professor punish you?" As soon as he saw Roy return, a melon-eating expression appeared on Ganglishi's face. "Of course not, the professor just asked me some simple questions." Roy smiled and said. "That's really a pity." Ganglishi shook his head and said. "What a pity." Roy looked at the steel man in confusion. "Do you know? You are the first and only person since the establishment of the school to break a classmate's ribs. If nothing unexpected happens, you will be the holder of this record for a long time." Ganglishi smiled and said. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Knowledge is Power. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Knowledge is power. In the eyes of Ganglishi and others, Roy, who broke Morgan's ribs, may not have been fired, but he will definitely face some punishment. After all, he was the first student to injure his classmate. However, they never imagined that Professor X not only had no intention of punishing Roy, but also had a focus on cultivating his ideas. Whether it's asking Roy to go to the library to learn about the secondary variation of the X gene, or asking him to talk to Wolverine Logan, it's enough to prove this. Although Professor X did not explicitly state it, Roy could roughly guess why he did so. The reason is simple, because there are too few mutants who can awaken again. Although he has not yet shown particularly amazing combat effectiveness, Professor X knows that as long as he is given enough development time, he will eventually become a reliable backbone. Of course, the prerequisite is that he will not become an extremist like Magneto. Otherwise, the stronger his strength, the greater the threat it will bring. This is not a happy record. After speaking, Roy walked straight to the bed and without saying a word, lay down on the bed, thinking about the next arrangements. From the current situation, he should be able to spend his initial developmental period in school with peace of mind in the coming period. Although there will still be the Yakali Lake incident, there should not be too many problems in the short term. Stay calm and don't act recklessly, your lewd development. The mutated fish, fruit, and beast species, Qinglong, are constantly strengthening their body. Every day, his physical attributes will show a significant improvement. As long as he doesn't die himself, even if the Yakali Lake incident erupts, he won't be in any danger. In the Yakali Lake incident, the real challenge was not the dead woman controlled by Colonel Stryker, but Professor X controlled by Jason, the mutant son of Colonel Stryker. Colonel Stryker attempted to use a brainwave enhancer and the manipulated Professor X to eliminate all the mutants in the world at once. From a planning perspective, this plan is indeed very good. Unfortunately, this plan poses no threat to Roy. Due to the existence of absolute psychic protection, he can be immune to any form of psychic influence. So the most thorny issue in the Yakali Lake incident did not exist for him from the beginning. After deciding to focus on lewd development, Roy got up and left the dormitory to go to the library. There is still some time until evening, and before leaving school with Clarice to have dinner in the small town outside, he plans to catch up on knowledge about the secondary mutation of the X gene. Although he has the inherent advantage of being a prophet of a time traveler, all he knows is some future developments and the superpowers possessed by some well-known characters. He doesn't have much knowledge about other things in this world and the X gene. Anyway, being idle is also being idle, learning more knowledge is not a bad thing. How did you say that? Knowledge is power. After arriving at the library, Roy found a book related to the secondary mutation of the X gene and sat down in an empty seat, quickly browsing through it. I don't know if his mental attributes have also improved, but he found that his memory and understanding ability are much stronger now than before. Although he doesn't have the super learning ability of Superman at the moment, he unexpectedly found that being able to remember at a glance is not a problem for him now. In less than half an hour, he finished reading a professional book about the secondary mutation of the X gene and memorized the content word for word. After reading the first book, he picked up the second professional book about the X gene and quickly browsed through it. Time flies by. Quickly, it was around 5 p.m. in the afternoon. After reading all 3 professional books in front of him, he put them back on the bookshelf and walked towards the dormitory. Before he could return to the dormitory, he met Clarice in the hallway. Seeing Clarice hesitating in front of the dormitory door, he took the initiative to step forward and said to Clarice, "Are you here to find me?" "Aha." Clarice nodded shyly. "It's just right to start now, let's go," Roy said calmly. "Okay." Clarice quickly replied. Garage. According to the memory of the original owner, after finding the car that belonged to him, Roy drove with Clarice to leave the school. Although the mutant school is a boarding school, it does not restrict students from going out or leaving. Of course, it's best to talk to the school teachers when going out. Clarice had already told Phoenix in advance that she and Roy were going to a small town outside. Although she didn't explain the specific reason to Phoenix, Phoenix quickly agreed. Both Clarice and Roy are students who are about to reach adulthood. Feng Huangnu is also young, and even students at this age don't like to stay in school all day. Although the town is a bit far from the school. But Feng Huangnu is not worried about their safety. The mutant school has been established for decades. The residents of the small town have long been accustomed to the presence of mutants. Unlike other places, the residents of the small town do not discriminate much against mutants. Perhaps to cater to Roy's taste, Clarice specifically chose a Chinese restaurant. To be precise, it is the only Chinese restaurant in the town. On the surface, this Chinese restaurant is not very impressive, with a small area and not luxurious enough decoration. But as soon as he entered the restaurant, Roy knew that the Chinese food in this restaurant should not be too bad. The reason is simple, because this is a very typical couple's shop. Both husband and wife are of Chinese descent, with the husband being a chef and the wife being a waiter and cashier. In addition to the couple, there is also a little boy in the restaurant who is only 5 or 6 years old. Clarice is obviously not here for the first time. After entering the restaurant, Clarice greeted the landlady with familiarity. Clarice, who was a bit introverted in school, now feels like she has changed, looking incredibly relaxed. Mr. and Mrs. Lee came here a few years ago and opened this restaurant. Clarice said to Roy. "It seems that you probably came here before." Roy smiled and said. "It's okay, I'll come once or twice a week." Clarice quickly replied. "Since you are a regular customer, you can take your order." Roy put down his menu and said to Clarice. "Aha." Clarice called the landlady over, didn't look at the menu, and started ordering directly. After Clarice finished ordering, the landlady first glanced at Roy. Later, I started teasing Clarice. "This is Clarice, your first time bringing someone to a restaurant for dinner. Is he your boyfriend?" As soon as the landlady finished speaking, Clarice's delicate and fair face showed a shy blush. No, we're just classmates." Clarice, who was just elegant and relaxed, lowered her head and whispered. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Swordtooth Tiger. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Swordtooth Tiger. Clarice is telling the truth, she and Roy are indeed just ordinary classmates. But her current shy expression still caused a misunderstanding for the boss lady. After hearing Clarice's answer, the landlady showed an expression that I understood. She smiled and looked at Roy and Clarice, then slowly said. "Clarice, your male classmate is quite handsome. You can bring more restaurants to eat in the future. Eating together with 2 people won't make you so lonely." After speaking, before Clarice could speak, the landlady left with the menu. Although the landlady left, the shyness and blush on Clarice's pretty face still lingered. After more than 10 seconds, she looked up at Roy and whispered. "Mrs. Lee likes to joke around more often. I think she's right. Eating together with two people is indeed a bit better than eating alone, and it won't appear so lonely. If you come here to eat in the future, you can call me. Compared to the food in the school cafeteria, I still prefer traditional flower growers' dishes," Roy said seriously. Although the original owner of the body had not had much interaction with Clarice before, Roy was not the original owner of the body. Seeing that Clarice looked exactly like the woman when she was young, he made up his mind secretly. As a traveler, he certainly doesn't want to be a single dog in the Marvel Universe. Although there are many girls in the mutant school, there are not many who truly meet his aesthetic preferences. Clarice, who has a typical flower grower appearance and an extremely outstanding appearance, is certainly the one that best suits his aesthetic. He won't suddenly change his aesthetics just because he has traveled through time. I also quite like the food here," Clarice quickly said. Because there were not many guests in the restaurant, Clarice's order was quickly served. Roy was eating the authentic flower grower dishes in front of him, while tapping on Clarice to gather information. Although Clarice is already 17 years old, she is about to reach adulthood. But for Roy, it's not difficult to gather the information he wants from her. Quickly, he figured out what exactly happened last night. As he guessed, Morgan fell in love with Clarice and wanted her to become his girlfriend. Although Morgan looks decent and has some fame in school, he is not the type that Clarice likes. Clarice has rejected Morgan many times before. But Morgan not only did not give up, but also began a more fervent pursuit. Last night, Morgan was not sure if he had been stimulated by his companions or suddenly got hooked and insisted on bringing Clarice to the small town to watch a movie. Clarice certainly wouldn't agree, she refused without even thinking about it. Although rejected, Morgan clearly had no intention of giving up just like this and intended to force Clarice to agree to a date. At this moment, the original owner of the body appeared. There's nothing to say next. After a verbal confrontation, the physical owner and Morgan agreed to have a sparring in this afternoon's practice class. If Morgan loses, he will apologize to Clarice and never harass her again. If the physical owner loses, the physical owner will apply to drop out of school and voluntarily leave the school. Roy doesn't know why the original owner of the body would agree to this condition. But according to Clarice, in that situation, the original owner of the body can only agree. Otherwise, Morgan would have teamed up with the few followers around him to teach the original owner of the body a lesson. Besides figuring out what happened last night, he also figured out why Clarice came to the mutant school. Half a year ago, Clarice lived with her adoptive father, the saber-toothed tiger. Although the saber-toothed tiger is not Clarice's biological father, he still takes care of Clarice like his own daughter. However, one night 6 months ago, the saber-toothed tiger suddenly left the place of residence with Clarice. Clarice didn't know where the saber-toothed tiger was taking her at the time. It wasn't until she arrived in this small town that the saber-toothed tiger told her that she wanted to leave for a while to deal with some things and let her join the mutant school, waiting for her to come back. After leaving all the money on his body to Clarice and having lunch with her at this restaurant, the saber-toothed tiger left without looking back. Until now, Clarice didn't know where the saber-toothed tiger had gone, nor did she know when the saber-toothed tiger would come back. Although she was worried about the saber-toothed tiger, she knew that all she could do now was wait for the saber-toothed tiger at the mutant school. After listening to Clarice's account, Roy had only two thoughts. The first one is that this is not simply the X-Men movie universe. Although there are saber-toothed tigers and Clarice in the X-Men movie universe, saber-toothed tigers are not Clarice's adoptive father. The second one is that the saber-toothed tiger seems to be a very responsible adoptive father. Although Clarice did not mention how the saber-toothed tiger had taken care of her before, both the tone of the narration and the expression on her face were enough to prove that Clarice was very concerned about the safety of the saber-toothed tiger. If the saber-toothed tiger was not good to Clarice, she would never be so worried about the saber-toothed tiger now. After dinner, Clarice was about to check out when the landlady told her that Roy had already checked out in advance. After seeing Clarice looking at her with a puzzled expression, Roy smiled and said, "I have obsessive-compulsive disorder. If I go out to eat with a beautiful girl and the girl pays the bill, I feel uncomfortable all over. But tonight it was clearly agreed that I would treat you." Clarice quickly said, "Tonight is your invitation. You treat me, I'll settle the bill. These are two different things, there's no conflict," Roy said with a natural expression on his face. Clarice knew that Roy was changing his mind, but she wasn't angry. Instead, she felt a little happy inside. Because Roy just said she's a beautiful girl. Then, "Next time you treat me, I'll settle the bill," Clarice said shyly. "Okay." After leaving the restaurant, Roy thought Clarice would want to return to school immediately. However, Clarice suddenly spoke up. "It's not very late yet, should we go see a movie together?" "Watching a movie?" Roy looked at Clarice with some surprise. Morgan wanted to invite Clarice to watch a movie, but Clarice refused. But now, Clarice has taken the initiative to ask him to watch a movie. Although he didn't know which movies were currently showing, Roy agreed without even thinking about it. The small town they are currently in, although not very populous, has a large area and all the necessary commercial venues. After arriving at the cinema, Roy handed over the power to choose movies to Clarice, while he scanned the surroundings. The next second, he saw two figures that were not familiar, but also not unfamiliar. Iceman, Bobby, and Rascal Girl, Little Mischievous. P.S. New book seeking collection, seeking recommendation tickets, end of this chapter. Chapter 9. Human and Animal Transformation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Human and Animal Transformation. When Roy saw Bobby and Little Naughty, they also saw him. Soon, they took the initiative to come over and looked at him and Clarice with their melon-eating expressions. "No wonder you made such a heavy move this afternoon," forcefully breaking Morgan's ribs. Bobby joked about Roy. Roy didn't pay much attention to Bobby's teasing. However, Clarice is not as calm as he is. As soon as Bobby finished speaking, Clarice shyly lowered her head. "It shouldn't be. Didn't she grow up in a beautiful country? Is this too easy to be shy?" Although Roy is not very clear about Clarice's life experience. However, if nothing unexpected happens, she should have been pursued by the opposite sex during her growth process. Even if she has never been in a relationship before, she wouldn't be shy just by being teased. Like the owner of the restaurant, Clarice's shyness successfully misled Bobby and Little Naughty, causing them to think she was dating Roy. Looking at Clarice's blushing face, Roy asked Bobby, "Are you also watching movies?" "Well, I heard a good movie has been released recently, so I plan to come and watch it to pass the time," Bobby quickly said. "Since we have met, why don't we all watch together? After watching, we can also go back to school together," the little mischievous person standing next to Bobby quickly said. "What do you think, Clarice?" Roy asked Clarice for her opinion. "Just make your decision," Clarice whispered. Although they were all classmates, looking up and down in school, Clarice still felt a little nervous in front of Bobby and the little mischievous. "Then let's go together. Girls are responsible for choosing movies, while men are responsible for buying food," Roy quickly said. "Okay." Iceman and Little Naughty both replied. Although the time we spent together was not particularly long, it was obvious that they had a little tacit understanding between the couple. After the movie, Roy drove back to school with Clarice. Bobby and Little Naughty didn't ride in the same car as them, but drove behind them. Unlike Roy, the car Bobby is currently driving is not his own, but his Laser Eye. Although Laser Eye is a teacher, he is a very reasonable teacher. As long as there is a reasonable reason, he does not mind lending the car to students to drive. Of course, his favorite cars will definitely not be borrowed. Soon, Roy and the four of them return to school. After sending Clarice back to her dormitory, Roy arrived alone in the forest behind the school. After knowing that he had obtained the fish fruit, phantom beast, and green dragon form, he always wanted to experience the feeling of transforming into an adult beast and beast form. Although he doesn't have the same level of strength as Kaido now, the transformation of human and animal forms automatically comprehends and becomes an instinctive existence at the moment of obtaining fruit. After confirming that there was no one around, Roy took a deep breath. Then, with a thought, he decisively began to transform. Human-animal type. He did not choose to transform into a beast, but instead chose to transform into a human beast. Although the beast type looks a bit more domineering than the human beast type, the transformation of the beast type is too dynamic. He doesn't intend to let others know now that he has the ability to transform into a green dragon. In just the blink of an eye, Roy completely changed his appearance. The blue dragon scales covered his body, and his hands and feet transformed into dragon claws. A pair of sharp and forked dragon horns grew on his forehead, and a thick and powerful dragon tail appeared behind him. After transforming into an adult beast, Roy not only changed his appearance, but also made significant improvements in his body attributes. All animal-type demon fruit abilities can be owner-type or beast-type. There are 3 forms of human-animal type. Not to mention the human form, it is the form of an ordinary person. Animal type refers to the complete transformation of a capable individual into an animal, possessing all the characteristics of an animal. As for the human-animal form, it is to transform the body into a wild animal form while retaining the human form, or to transform some parts of the body into a wild animal form. After transforming into an adult animal form, the physical attributes of the capable person will be improved, and the body parts that transform into a beast form will also be correspondingly strengthened. Among the 3 forms of transformation, humanoid is undoubtedly the weakest. The human-animal type and the animal type each have their own advantages. The human-beast type can use various moves that can only be used in human form because it still retains its human form. Let's take Roy's current humanoid form as an example. After transforming into an adult animal form, he has both the flexibility in movement speed of a human state, as well as the attacking style of a beast form. He can use parts such as dragon claws, dragon tails, and dragon horns to attack. Compared to fully transformed animal forms, human animal forms are more balanced. Because the human-beast type can use both moves that can only be used in human form and moves that can only be used in animal form. So among the 3 forms of humanoid, and animalistic, Roy's personal favorite is the humanoid. The power of animal type may not necessarily be weaker than that of human animal type. But after transforming into an animal form, only the moves in animal form can be used. Although there are fewer moves that can be used, beast forms can fully unleash the full power of beast forms. After transforming into a dragon-like human beast form, Roy simply felt the power of the human beast form and released the transformation, returning to the human form. Time flies by. Unconsciously, a week passed. Over the past week, Roy appeared to be living a mundane school life as before. In fact, he has been continuously training this week, striving to develop the abilities of fish fruit, phantom beast, and green dragon form. Although he had not received any relevant training before, with the reference template of Kaido, he quickly developed his own training plan. First, learn the moves of Kaido, and then develop new moves that suit your actual situation. After a week of continuous practice, he successfully mastered his first devil fruit move. Heat Breath. Unlike Kaido's Heat Breath, Roy's current Heat Breath can be cast in a humanoid form. Of course, due to the size of the body, the heat released in the human-animal form cannot be compared to the heat released by Kaido in the animal form. The heat breath unleashed by Kaido in a beast-like state can attack at a distance of several kilometers, instantly evaporating a mountain and even penetrating the entire Ghost Island in an instant. Roy's current strength is far from being comparable to that of Kaido, and the difference in body size between the human beast type and the beast type also determines that the heat breath power exerted by the human beast type will not be too strong. Of course, this won't be too strong compared to the heat generated by Kaido. For ordinary people and less powerful mutants, Roy's heat breath in the humanoid form is no less powerful than missiles. Heat breath is not only Roy's first devil fruit battle move, but also his first ranged and energy attack move. In addition to his hot breath, he also gained one more thing this week, which is that his physical attributes have become even more amazing. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. The Power of the Green Dragon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The Power of the Green Dragon. After completing today's training, Roy opened the attribute panel that only he could see. Host. Roy Race. Human, Mutant, Devil Fruit Ability, Devil Fruit. Fish and Fish Fruit, Phantom Beast Species, Green Dragon Form, Mutating, Dominance. None Strength. 91.2, Fist Force 10.6 tons, Speed. 68.4 Physical Fitness. 89.6 Spirit. 53.9 Bounty. 50 Berry Green Dragon Power. LV-1X Gene Superpower. Fiery Task. None Storage Space. Open System Mall. Not opened, under maintenance, opening time unknown. Compared to a week ago, Roy's physical attributes have undergone earth-shattering changes now. A week ago, his punching power was only about 1.5 tons. And now, with just one punch, he has a force of 10 tons. If he uses his current physical fitness to fight Morgan, Morgan can only hold on for 1 or 2 seconds at most in front of him. If he were more ruthless, it wouldn't be difficult to kill Morgan with a single punch. In addition to the surge in physical attributes, he now has an additional thing called the Green Dragon Power. The power of Qinglong, in simple terms, is the energy that appears in his body due to the form of the fish, fruit, beast, and Qinglong. At the beginning, this energy was not called the power of Qinglong, but rather the power of demons. After all, this is because of the energy obtained from the devil fruit. But he didn't think the demonic power sounded very good, so he changed the system to Qinglong power. Although his current Qinglong strength is only level 1, it still gives him a strength far superior to other students. Nowadays, he can be considered the strongest student in the mutant school. Whether it's the Iceman, the Fireman, or the Steel Man, they are no match for him now. Even when Laser Eyes and Phoenix Women confront him, they need to be taken seriously. Speaking of this, we have to talk about his current situation. In order to avoid the situation where other students were injured by him during practice classes again, he no longer needs to attend practice classes with other students. When other students attend practice classes, he will receive individual accompaniment from Laser Eyes and others in the underground training room of the school. Although Professor X did not explicitly state it, everyone can see that Professor X is going to cultivate him into a new X-Men. He can learn heat therapy within a week, not only through his own efforts, but also thanks to the careful guidance of the Laser Eye. Laser Eyes have rich experience in emitting and controlling energy. Although one of them uses his eyes and the other uses his mouth, it does not affect the Laser Eye's guidance to him. If there was anything that Roy was dissatisfied with over the past week, it would be that the only Wolverine among the current X-Men who excels in close combat has not returned to school until now. Although Laser Eye and Storm Girl can also guide him, they cannot guide him on how to engage in melee combat. Their strength is indeed not weak. But the problem is, their bodies are a bit too fragile. If they engage in close combat with Roy, Roy must always control his strength and speed to avoid accidentally killing them. After turning off the attribute panel that only he could see, Roy walked towards the mutant school several tens of kilometers away. If it's Laser Eyes and Storm Girl guiding him, he will train in the underground training room of the school. At other times, he would come to the forest several tens of kilometers away from the school to practice alone. Although the underground training room of the school is very sturdy, he chose to come to this forest for training in order to facilitate the practice of heat breathing and the development of new moves, which usually does not have many people present. Because he has successfully mastered the heat breath, his current focus of practice is on enhancing the power of heat breath and developing new moves called Bad Wind. Like heat breath, his new move, Bad Wind, is also different from Kaido. It is not a move that can only be used in animal form, but a move that can be used in both human and animal form. Based on the current development progress, he estimates that in a few days, he should be able to initially master the Bad Wind in a human-beast state. With far superior physical attributes, Roy quickly advanced through the sparsely populated forest. In just over 10 minutes, he returned to the mutant school. After returning to school, the first thing he did was to comfortably take a hot bath in the dormitory. After washing up and changing into clean clothes, he walked towards the restaurant. On the way to the restaurant, students kept nodding and greeting him. It is not a secret that Professor X instructed the Laser Eye and others to train him separately. Although they do not know the specific training content, one thing they are certain of is that Professor X is going to cultivate him into a new X.Men. For the vast majority of students in school, becoming an X.Men is like becoming a doctor and lawyer in human society, equivalent to having an enviable job. Although there is no clear graduation age for mutant schools, as adults, most students choose to leave school and return to human society to start a new life. At this time, although the relationship between ordinary people and mutants has not deteriorated to the point of endless death, discrimination against mutants is everywhere. Mutants like Roy and Iceman, who have no significant variation in appearance, cannot be distinguished as mutants by ordinary people as long as they do not actively exhibit superpowers. But those who have significant variations in appearance are not so lucky. These individuals with significant variations in appearance are the main group of people discriminated against by ordinary people. After tinkering with the knowledge of this world, Roy realized that there were subtle differences in the division of mutants in this world compared to what he remembered. Nowadays, the official categorizes mutants into 5 levels. From high to low, they are alpha level, beta level, gamma level, delta level, and epsilon level. Although Professor X proposed the theory of omega-level mutants. But because no omega-level mutant has yet emerged, omega-level mutants are still in theory. Although Professor X is hiding well, Roy, as a traveler, knows that there is now a potential omega-level mutant in the school. Phoenix Girl. The current Phoenix is only an alpha-level mutant in official evaluation. But Roy knew that the Phoenix had not yet become an omega-level mutant because the Phoenix power inside her was still in a dormant state. Once the Phoenix power awakens within the Phoenix Lady, she will undoubtedly become an omega-level mutant. Although Professor X noticed the powerful energy hidden within Phoenix's body and specially arranged a spiritual cage, he was not sure what was going on with the powerful energy inside Phoenix's body. End of this chapter.